We often think about wartime intelligence, spies, secret missions. But what if something like, well, just understanding messy handwriting or maybe a forgotten shorthand system was actually key in World War I?
It's kind of surprising, isn't it?
It really is. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into the very early days of American code breaking during World War I. We're using first-hand accounts to see just how unprepared the U.S. really was.
Yeah, the situation they walked into was, well, frankly, quite alarming. You had coded messages just flooding into the War College.
Right.
And almost immediately, it was obvious they just didn't have the trained people.
Yeah.
There's this one account that compares it to a hospital with 5,000 beds and only one doctor.
Wow, that really paints a picture.
It does. It shows how not investing in this cryptographic skill beforehand left the U.S. incredibly vulnerable right when the war kicked off. They needed code breakers, like yesterday.
Absolutely. And the first attempts to find them, well, they really just highlighted how bad the problem was. They sent out this desperate plea, basically, to London, Paris, Rome.
Asking for help, right?
Exactly. Asking for instructors, anyone who could teach Americans how to break German military codes. The response was polite, helpful even. They sent examples of intercepted messages, but no instructors.
So here are the puzzles, but nobody to teach you the rules.
Pretty much. Which, led to some, let's say, unconventional recruiting.
Yeah, facing that shortage, they had to look elsewhere. They started looking at people in the U.S. who showed any interest in codes. Enthusiastic amateurs, academics.
Even if they only knew a little bit.
Even if they only had a really superficial grasp. It led to this interesting situation where you had scholars, maybe experts in ancient languages, suddenly getting military commissions.
I can just imagine. You've got this maybe slightly overwhelmed young lieutenant suddenly in charge of these scholarly captains.
Right, and apparently there were some funny moments. The lieutenant's more practical, maybe rough around the edges approach was jokingly called native intelligence.
Huh. Okay, but enthusiasm wasn't enough, clearly.
No, not at all. And they quickly realized that being a great scholar wasn't the same as having what they started calling a cipher brain.
A cipher brain.
Yeah, that sort of innate ability, that originality to see patterns and solutions that code breaking requires. Scholarship is often about absorbing what's already known.
Right.
But this was basically a brand new field for the U.S. military. There wasn't much existing knowledge to absorb. They needed inventors, discoverers. Many academics just didn't have that spark.
But not all of them, right? You mentioned Dr. John M. Manley.
Exactly. Manley, head of English at the University of Chicago. He did have it. He had that cipher brain, that intuition. He ended up being one of their most vital code breakers.
Interesting. So someone from a totally different field steps up.
Yeah, it just shows how crucial talent can pop up in unexpected places.
So while they're scrambling to build this team, this even bigger problem emerges. It wasn't just about breaking enemy codes anymore.
No, it became about their own communications.
Yeah.
The scary possibility that American secrets were just out there, wide open.
How did that come to light?
Well, there was this memorandum. It came from the Assistant Secretary of State, and it laid out a really stark warning based on British intelligence.
What did it say?
It said the War Department's method for coding cablegrams, those vital messages sent over undersea cables, was entirely unsafe. A serious menace to secrecy.
Entirely unsafe. Wow.
And worse, the British reported that the Germans were actually intercepting all of these messages. Every single...
Wait, all of them? Think about that. Everything going between General Pershing in Europe and Washington? Troop movements, plans, failures?
Potentially ending up straight in German hands. And it wasn't just simple tapping. Those transatlantic cables, people thought they were secure deep underwater.
Yeah.
But German submarines could use induction, basically picking up the electronic signals without even physically touching the cable.
Okay, that's terrifying. So even the physical security wasn't enough?
Not at all. And then it got even worse. It turned out a copy of the War Department's own code book had been stolen back in 1916 in Mexico. And they had photographic evidence suggesting the Germans now had it.
So the Germans might literally have the key.
They might have. But here's the kicker. Even without the book, tests showed the code itself was weak. It used pretty simple substitution methods.
Meaning?
Meaning even a moderately skilled cryptanalyst could probably break it relatively quickly, even without the stolen book. Its basic structure was just flawed.
Okay, so let's get this straight. The codes are weak, the physical cables aren't secure, And the Germans probably had the code book anyway.
Yes, a trifecta of vulnerability.
This must have set off massive alarm bells. What happened next?
Oh, absolutely. The order came down immediately.
Yeah.
Stop everything else. Fix this. Revise the entire code and cipher system for the War Department.
Now they get to lead that. You can't just pull anyone in.
No, they needed real expertise.
Yeah.
They brought someone over from the State Department code room, someone with actual practical experience in this stuff. And they set up a dedicated subsection pretty quickly, actually. Started with about 10 clerks. Their job. Create a whole new set of codes and ciphers for everyone.
Everyone meaning?
Intelligence officers,
Yeah.
agents in the field, General Pershing himself, other high-ranking officials, basically anyone sending sensitive information.
It really highlights something, doesn't it? The Signal Corps, who you'd think would handle this, they just weren't ready for this kind of wartime cryptographic need.
Completely unprepared.
Yeah.
And that lack of preparedness, that sort of naive mindset,
Right.
it's extended quite high up. There's this anecdote
Oh, yeah.
about a newly appointed military attaché, a senior guy, experienced officer. He's getting briefed on modern secure communication methods.
Okay.
And he kind of scoffs at the complexity. He boasts that during the Spanish-American War, their big secret method was just adding 1898 to code words.
Adding 1898. Seriously.
Seriously. And in his view, the Spanish never figured it out.
That's almost unbelievable. Thinking that would work against early 20th century Germany with their intelligence apparatus.
Exactly. It shows a dangerous level of complacency. And apparently that attitude wasn't just in Washington. It was present even closer to the fighting.
You mean in France?
Yeah. A young American officer, fresh from code-breaking training, gets to France and is immediately worried about the security of General Pershing's communications.
So he speaks up.
He does more than speak up. He actually convinces his superiors to let him try and intercept American radio code and cipher messages right there in the American sector.
Wait, intercept our own messages?
Yes. Messages that were considered secure, carrying the most secret information.
Okay, I have a bad feeling about this. What happened?
Well, this student cryptographer, as the account calls him, with no prior knowledge of the specific American systems being used,
Yeah.
he solved them within hours.
Hours, not days or weeks.
Hours.
Just a few hours. Which tells you everything you need to know about how secure they actually were.
That's devastating. If a trainee could do it that fast, imagine what experienced German codebreakers could do. The general staff, when they heard, they were understandably panicked, alarmed, urgent reaction.
And what kind of information was in these messages he broke?
The worst kind. Troop positions, deployments along the St. Mihiel salient, a really critical area, the exact number and names of the American divisions involved.
Oh, no.
And crucially, the exact timing of the upcoming American offensive.
So the element of surprise.
Completely gone, blown.
What was the result?
The direct result was that the Germans, now knowing exactly what was coming and when, started pulling back their troops strategically before the attack even began.
So the offensive happened, but...
It succeeded, yes, but it wasn't the decisive knockout surprise blow it was designed to be. The Germans were waiting, or at least withdrawing in an orderly way.
It just reveals this, childish, unfounded trust, as one source put it, in systems that were just not up to the job, both in Washington and right there on the front lines.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these kinds of stories, these near misses driven by faulty security, they often get lost in the big picture history,
It really makes you think how differently things could have gone. But, okay, this massive scare, this wake-up call, it did force real change, right? The codebreakers finally started getting some respect.
Yes, exactly. That small code and cipher compilation subsection, the one started in a hurry. It finally started getting recognition, praise from the War Department.
Then it grew.
It grew significantly. It got its official designation, MI8, the Cryptographic Bureau. And it expanded into a pretty large organization with 5 specialized subsections.
5. What were they?
Let's see, there was code and cipher compilation, communications, shorthand analysis, a secret ink lab, and code and cipher solution, the breaking side.
And that communications subsection, that sounds key.
Yeah.
They realized they needed their own secure way to talk, right? Not rely on the old leaky channels.
Precisely. That was a huge step. They brought in another expert from the State Department's code room, set up their own direct wire lines, trained up clerks and operators, and incredibly, within just weeks, they were sending cables faster, more accurately, and cheaper than even the Associated Press.
Wow, that's impressive speed.
It really was.
Yeah.
And they also took on training duties, teaching clerks for overseas agencies, instructing agents on how to actually use the codes properly.
It's just fascinating watching this whole capability being built from basically nothing right in the middle of the war. And it wasn't just codes and ciphers in the traditional sense, was it? They ran into some weird stuff, like that letter from the Department of Justice.
Ah, yes, that's a great example of the unexpected challenges. This letter comes in, initially suspected of being some kind of complex cipher.
Why?
Because nobody could read it. It was addressed to the wife of a German POW, a guy named Werner Tismer. Standard procedure, if it looks suspicious, send it to the code breakers. The assumption was, okay, it must be code.
But it wasn't.
Nope. On closer look, they realized it was shorthand. But not Greg or Pittman, the common systems used in the US.
So a new puzzle. They knew codes, maybe some basic ciphers, but shorthand.
Exactly. Uncharted territory. But they were smart about it. They figured, okay, German prisoner, German wife, probably a German shorthand system.
Makes sense.
So they head over to the Congressional Library, and sure enough, they find materials on the Gabelsberger shorthand system, which was widely used in Germany. They even found an old magazine about it and could see the characters matched the letter.
Okay, great detective work. But identifying it is one thing, reading it is another.
Right. They needed someone fluent in Gabelsberger, and this amazing bit of luck.
Yeah.
They find an expert working right there at the library, a local guy.
Yeah.
Though there was apparently a moment of suspicion, him being German-American in wartime.
Understandable, I guess, given the climate.
But they took a chance, had him transcribe it, and the contents. Pretty interesting.
What to say?
Instructions. How to write secret messages, using lemon juice as invisible ink on the envelope flaps. And how to hide money inside jars of preserved fruit being sent through the mail. Practical spycraft, basically.
Anything else? Anything bigger?
Yes. The letter also detailed Tismer's plan to escape the POW camp. He was digging a tunnel.
Wow. So this one weird letter cracked open a whole escape plot and revealed smuggling techniques.
Exactly. And suddenly, MI8 was flooded. Postal censorship started sending them every seized shorthand notebook, every intercepted shorthand letter they found.
A whole new problem to solve.
Yep. They had to create another special subsection just for shorthand analysis. They had to figure out how to identify dozens of different systems quickly. Eventually, they could read over 30 systems in various languages.
That's incredible. And you mentioned secret ink, too.
Right, the Tismer letter mentioned lemon juice. But that discovery led them down the path of identifying and developing methods to reveal all sorts of secret inks. Another whole area they had to master on the fly.
So looking back at this whole period, these early days, a few things really stand out, don't they?
Definitely. The initial chaos and just sheer unpreparedness is striking.
Yeah, staggering.
And the critical vulnerabilities in what they thought were secure communications, that's deeply concerning.
And then the vital role of individuals, people with these unique, sometimes totally unexpected skills, like Manley, or that young officer in France, or even the shorthand expert at the library.
Absolutely indispensable. And those aha moments, realizing academic smarts don't automatically equal code-breaking skills.
Right.
The shock of how easily their own secure messages were being read. And this hidden world revealed by things like a POW's letter in funny handwriting. It's fascinating.
It really makes you think about today, doesn't it? With cybersecurity being such a huge deal, these early struggles, they feel very relevant.
They really do. That need to stay ahead, to anticipate threats, the constant need for innovation, and just plain vigilance in how we communicate securely, it hasn't changed.
It brings us to a final thought for you, listening at home. Given these kinds of unexpected hurdles, like shorthand suddenly becoming a major intelligence issue, what other quirky skills or unforeseen challenges might intelligence agencies have bumped up against in wartime? Things that maybe never made it into the history books.
Or maybe think about it this way. How has technology since WWI completely changed the game? How different does secret communication and breaking it look today compared to lemon juice and stolen code books?